So hello, everyone. Welcome to our panel here on the VC Talent Partner role. This is hosted by Talent Collective. And for those of you who don't know what Talent Collective is, we are a community for women in the TA space. Would love to chat with anyone who may be interested in our membership and joining afterwards, but we host a lot of panels like this. Most of them are TA focused, recruiting focused, and or people operations. But we also do some topics on women's issues. We actually have something coming up next week on women's pay equity. So hopefully you all can join that one as well. And we've got a ton of other really fun benefits and things that we do. So, but on to the topic of the day. So this panel was actually inspired by something we did in person a couple of months ago in San Francisco. We hosted a panel that had, I think, 4 VC talent partners. And the topic was really around like, how's the VC talent partner role different from agency recruiting and then also different from in-house recruiting. It was super, super successful. And I wanted to give everybody an opportunity, everybody that's not in San Francisco, an opportunity to learn more about the VC talent partner role. I think it's something that has been on the rise in the last probably 10 plus years. And a lot of members and just other professionals in recruiting don't know a lot about it. I think there's a lot of curiosity about VCs and how the talent partner role operates. So really excited to dig in here, and a huge, huge thank you to our speakers, Beth, Cecilia, and Lauren, for being here and taking the time and sharing all of your expertise and experiences. We will hopefully have a little bit of time at the end for Q&A. So as you're hearing our speakers talk, if you think of any questions you'd like answered, feel free to put them in the chat and I'll try to keep an eye on those. And yeah, so I thought we could start off by doing some brief introductions to our speakers. So if you could just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about maybe your path in TA, how you got into the VC world. That would be great. We could start with you, Beth, and then we'll go to Cecilia and then to Lauren.
Hi, everyone. I'm Beth Scheer. I'm the head of talent at Homebrew. We are a seed stage fund based in the Bay Area, but we've got companies all over the US and in Latin America. We've been around about 12 years, and I've been with Homebrew for 9 years. We are a small, lean team, 4 of us. So I'm a one-person talent function. And a little bit about my background, I actually started off in marketing and PR, public affairs after college, and then started recruiting in Corp Com. And then I was running PR at a startup, and I decided I wasn't very good at PR and I wanted to do something else. And I sort of became the head of recruiting and just sort of kind of taught myself how to hire people. And then I worked at Google for 6 years, all different functions, and Salesforce for 6 years before joining Homebrew.
Awesome. Thank you, Beth. Cecilia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cecilia. I'm with MVP Ventures. We specialize in co-investing. And so we don't lead rounds or take board seats, able to write this more flexible size check. And we specialize in deep tech, AI, hardware, robotics. And also our sweet spot is earlier stage seed and series A, especially when writing that first check. I've been with the firm now a little over a year and a half, but a bulk of my tech career has been with companies like Facebook and Robinhood. I also spent some time abroad in Hong Kong and Sao Paulo, Brazil, where I took on in-house roles kind of with a location-specific strategy. So I was super excited to be here with all of you.
Thank you, Cecilia. And Lauren.
Awesome. I joined Decibel as their first talent partner about 6 months ago. It's been awesome thus far. Decibel is really focused on pre-product market fit founders, technical products, technical buyers, also focused on AI along with everyone. But we're really focused on cybersecurity, infrastructure, modern engineering tools. So purely in the B2B SaaS space. Prior to that, I was running talent advisory for General Catalyst's consumer and crypto portfolio. So really came from both ends of the spectrum. I was also working on our incubator portfolio there, and a lot of our seed and creation work. So prior have worked in-house leading talent from 0 to 1 at a startup, and then have scaled businesses from 10 to north of 100. And then at the exec search side of things, on the agency side, have placed folks at every phase of a business, and placed probably 78 executives over the course of my career.
Wow, so impressive. Thank you. Appreciate that. And I have a lot of gratitude to Beth, because Beth actually helped me go from agency to in-house. She helped me get a role with one of her portfolio companies. So huge thanks to Beth. And I know that all of you ladies really played just such an instrumental role in helping your portfolio companies find amazing talent. So excited to dive in here. So one of the things, when I was actually transitioning from agency in-house, I was exploring the talent partner role myself, and sounded like just a really interesting role. And as I started to speak with more and more talent partners, I realized that the role is pretty different when you go from one VC to another, depending on the size of the VC, depending on the stages in the port of the companies. So we'd love to dig in a bit and hear from each of you on what is a typical day in the life look like for you right now at your current VC. And I know maybe a couple of you have worked at VCs where the day in the life was very different. So you can also share a little bit about that. And we can actually just go in reverse order. So if we want to start with Lauren, that'd be great.
Yeah. So I know I chatted with you about this quite a bit, Krista, but yeah, so General Catalyst, completely different day in the life than my current role today at Decibel, for a number of reasons. But my portfolio alone that I was covering at General Catalyst was roughly 275 active portfolio companies, whereas today the entire portfolio is 32 companies. So very, very different from how deep you're able to go. Today, I'm back to running a lot of end-to-end executive searches, which is super fun. I can go really deep with all of my portfolio companies. And in my 6 months of being here, I've met almost every founder in the portfolio. So that's fun. On the General Catalyst side of things, obviously, I would be totally lying if I said that was the case. So, I did everything I could to move the needle in the best way that we could. But, companies that you have lower ownership in, or that it doesn't really make sense from an ROI perspective for us to go super deep with, it was a lot of more of the reactive support that we could provide. So if they have questions that came up from a people or HR perspective, I'd be there to help them. Or if they, had imminent needs around who the best talent folks to chat with were for an executive search, I would be there to support. So kind of more of reactive support in that regard. And then there's a couple companies based on where they're at in their growth cycle that we're able to go really deep with and spend more meaningful time with.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you. Cecilia.
Yeah, similar to Lauren, I have also spent some time with a different venture firm before joining MVP. So at Human Capital, there was a much larger talent team, and you're much more embedded with 1 to 2, maybe 3 portfolio companies at any given time. Model is somewhat similar to like an RPO, where you become an extension of the portfolio company. You have their email alias, so on and so forth. And so you kind of spend the bulk of your time kind of really helping them with their top of funnel and committing to hiring like some of their key priority hires. At MVP, my day-to-day is a lot different because we also have now upwards of 85 portfolio companies. And I spend a lot more time with folks that we have recently deployed capital. They, kind of have this money where they need to grow their team. We don't commit to end-to-end hiring, but we do support in every other way that we see fit. And we try to meet the founders where they are. We obviously have some founders that have already built companies. They have been part of larger tech companies. And then we have founders that may be doing this for the first time. And so some days you're meeting with founders and just helping them pressure test the way that they're thinking about the role, do some research and understand understanding what the company is building. When we specialize kind of in deep tech, there are a lot of companies that end up building things that I don't have a lot of familiarity with. And so just understanding that landscape is incredibly important. But just try to be a thought partner throughout that process and making sure that they're thinking about things in the right way, leveling of the candidate and how do they complement the current team, so on and so forth. So day to day varies, but there is sprinkled in some sourcing to make sure that we're augmenting their sourcing efforts, especially early stage, getting some candidates so that the founders can actually speak with them and then really start being able to inform like what are the right archetypes like for the team. So that is kind of some of the things that we do on a day-to-day basis.
Great, thank you.
So when I was first approached about this job, and I had worked with the founding partners of Homebrew at Google, they reached out to me. I was at Salesforce. I was running executive search. And when they first sort of started talking about the job, I'm like, why would I leave my job running executive search to go recruit for 35 portfolio companies, which is how many we had then. Now we've got over 90. And they said, no, we don't want you to do recruiting anymore. I said, good, because I wouldn't leave my job for that. And also, I think to be successful, you can't be responsible for that many companies. It's virtually impossible. They said, we want you to teach our founders how to fish. And I think that is the best way to describe my job. The other way I sort of describe my job to people is I'm a talent therapist. Anything that falls under that people umbrella, I'm not an HR expert, but I know how to triage HR issues. So I think of my job as more consultative, coaching, advising to our founders. And my job is really to work myself out of a job. When a company raises, we do seed rounds and a few A's. Once that company raises the A, we usually take a step off the board seat, and they now got a new lead investor that might have 10 people on their talent team, which is a lot more resources than me being a solo person. So, as far as typical day, to answer the question, I mean, if it's a Monday or Thursday, we have a partner meeting. We do our partner meetings in less than an hour. There's 4 of us, so we can get through everything. I'm always amazed at people who work at the larger funds who never go to they can't go to partner meetings. There'd be too many people. But for me, in that partner meeting, we go over everything from operations of the firm, business development, excuse me, and then everybody goes through their calendar. So I know everybody my partners meet with, they know everyone I met with, they know what I'm doing right now. And then we go through each company, which sounds like, well, how could you do that in an hour? But we're really efficient. And like I said, we're just kind of going through the list of companies. We don't have 300 companies. But the rest of my day can be anything from, if we have a VP or above search, like I said, I don't do the searches, but I'll be involved. I make the introductions to the search firms. If it's a first-time founder who doesn't have a strong comfort level in running executive search, I'll be on those calls. And I kind of keep quiet, but anytime they need sort of search mediation, I'll jump in. I get introduced to so many people, friends of the Homebrew family. I talk to, 9 out of 10 people. And if there's not a job for them in the Homebrew portfolio, which is usually the case because we're pretty small, I'll make introductions outside of the portfolio. I do demos of, any new HR tech stack, recruiting tech stack, probably 3 to 5 demos a month, and then make recommendations to our founders. And then the other thing I do is I get to know a lot of executive coaches. Most of our founders work with an executive coach. So when they decide they want to go down that path, what I'll do is kind of coach them on, okay, well, here's the questions you should ask when you're talking to that person. Here's a few names, and then help them with the process. So those are the things I focus on.
Awesome. Sounds like you all are very much so advisors in your roles, and do some of that high level and then a little bit of in the weeds work as well. Given all of those things, what would you say is maybe like the top 1 to 2 challenges or, areas of opportunity that you face in your role? This time, Beth, we can start with you.
Sure. I think the hardest thing about my job is when companies are ready to hire at the seed before they go raise their Series A, they tend to overhire, meaning they go to market looking for like a head of sales, and then they fall in love with, a VP of sales who wants more money. And they're so flattered that this person might be interested in them, probably a company that's still in stealth mode and can't even, talk much about themselves. And they go for the shiny object. And at the seed stage, you really can't do that because that person is going to get bored in 4 months. And if you don't get your next round of fundraising, they're not going to be able to hire a team. So a lot of leveling and managing expectations, like that's a big part of my job. And it's a hard part of my job because not everyone listens.
Great, Cecilia.
Yeah, I think definitely agree with that. And I think sometimes just being able to get feedback can be challenging because, founders are busy and you introduce them to candidates and they seem very excited and you just really hope those conversations go well. But if they don't go well, you also want to learn about it so you can continue to calibrate and make sure you're putting the right people in front of them. So, it's kind of different from in-house in that sense where you can't just kind of sit down and be like, hey, we need to go through all of our candidates because you're not necessarily actively in that end-to-end search. And so I would say that if that was one thing I could change and make it easier for us to be able to get feedback, would be incredibly helpful.
Right.
I would echo that. I think when you come from the agency side or in-house, you're often courting candidates through a process. And so the pleaser in me wants to make sure that I'm doing right by all my candidates, but it's just really tough, honestly. And so I usually preface the conversations on the front end by just saying, this is different than how I would manage a process on the agency side of things. My job is to show you what's great in the portfolio and give you access to all of it. And please come to me if there's questions that you have, but thereafter, I will be less involved in the day-to-day of ensuring that you're moving through a process in a way that I would in the past. So it just kind of sets the stage for what that would look like. I think the other thing that's difficult in this role is if you're working at a bigger firm, what Beth had alluded to is like spot on. Like when you're not in the partner meetings and you're not involved in all of the conversations, it's really tough. There could be, things happen so quickly in startup world, as everyone knows. And so, there could be a new CEO search that's happening in the back end that maybe the board knows about and you're not involved. And so you're going deep with the CEO trying to build rapport and credibility. Meanwhile, they might be on their way out. So those types of things I think are definitely minimized when you're at a smaller firm and you have your hour-long or a couple hour-long partner meetings and everyone can kind of just run things back and forth. But when you're at a big firm and it's a little bit more siloed and you're kind of just executing independently, I think that's something that I came across that was somewhat frustrating, is that you just don't feel like you have all the pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And this next question actually was mirrored in the chat as well. So how do you go about measuring success in your role? And somebody in the chat had said, are there any metrics or goals that you're held accountable for? So yeah, anyone can chime in on this one.
So I came from companies that were incredibly data driven and everything was tied to a number. And if that's something that is really important to you, I would say don't go into a talent partner role because it's very hard to measure success. And I got this question pretty early on in my time at Homebrew. And I get this question still. And my answer is, what do your founders say about you? Are you taking work off their plate and helping them? And are you helping your partners? We did a 360 review of our firm a couple of years ago, and I read through all the feedback. And the reality is like my tactical help really does help move the needle, whereas you're not going to see that as much in a bigger company. So I think founder feedback and partner feedback, if you are owning searches, that's a different story because you can measure that. But I touch searches. Sometimes it's high touch, sometimes it's low touch. So it's much more difficult to measure.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. It was interesting. We went through an exercise at General Catalyst where we really did try to quantify our success, and it was really not productive for what it's worth. I think everyone was kind of going back and forth, spinning their wheels, and like, how do you quantify that you calibrated got them focused on the right profile, right? You could do so by saying, okay, well, I introduced 2 product marketers and I introduced 2 demand gen marketers. And in doing so, they got clarity, okay, conversion. But it's really like, it's all very fluffy and it's really difficult to determine how to quantify it. Or maybe you introduce someone in this role that then introduces a friend of theirs that gets placed. Do I take credit for that? Like it's really tough. And so I entirely agree. I think what it comes back to is, are your founders happy? Are your partners happy? When they think about the investment teams that are surrounding them, do they think about your, whether it's Homebrew or Decibel, as the most that are the ones that are being the most helpful and that they feel like are the extension of their team? And if so, like that's success in this role. So really tough to make it numbers driven. And I am still running some exec searches from end to end. And even that, I don't really think about, yeah, placements are great, but that's one small component of this role.
Mm-hmm. Anything to add to that, Cecila?
Yeah, I would just 100% agree with all of that. And I think if there's in any way that we're able to even help founders think about something a little bit differently, seeing things from a different perspective, not necessarily change their mind, but have information to really make informed decisions. And ultimately that kind of anchors on how they feel like we've been able to add value.
Mm-hmm. Great. All right. Thank you all. We're going to transition a bit into some more pointed questions. So Lauren, this first one is for you. Just real quick, curious, am I breaking in and out at all? I don't know if my internet is funky, but I can turn off my camera if so.
Just a little bit. Seems like there is a lag on your side, Krista.
Okay, maybe I'll just turn off my video because I'm
It's not
experiencing
bad by any means, but just a tiny bit. Yeah.
Let me know if so. I can turn it off. Hopefully that'll help. I'm in a hotel room, so never know what's going on over here. All right. So Lauren, so we've talked a little bit about how different talent partner roles are different, in different stage VCs, et cetera. But how would you say the talent partner role differs from being on the agency side and from internal roles?
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, like a good recruiter is a good recruiter, and someone that's great in talent is going to be just fine across the board. I think on the venture side, there is, something that was a big learning curve for me is I came from agency, and I've already mentioned that I like to please people and do right by people. And on the agency side, you do that by executing and closing. And so that was something that I think for me, it was a learning curve coming onto the agency side and realizing I couldn't say yes to everything. I couldn't say that I was going to run 50 searches at a given time because that's not feasible. It's not possible. And I would spread myself far too thin. So I think the prioritization of where you're going to spend your energy and making sure you have alignment across other key stakeholders is really, really important. And it's intimidating when you're coming in and you're trying to prove your worth, but then also trying to ensure that you're spending your time in the right areas, because you don't want people to think that you're dismissing their portfolio or that you're not excited to engage with them. But you really do need to think about, like, where are the areas that I need to be spending my time? Where does it make sense for me to sprint on candidates and actually surface them across the portfolio? And then where does it make sense for me to maybe teach to fish, like Beth had mentioned, and hop on an hour-long consultation with them, give them direction, give them the right resources, and then say, but unfortunately, I'm not going to be the person to hire your IC security engineer, So I think these are the types of things that were just new and learnings for me. You do get inbound all the time. So also managing, where do I hop on a phone call and spend my time trying to help support someone, even if it's just to be polite? Where does it maybe not make sense, but how do I make them feel like, Decibel is going to keep them top of mind and continue to think of them? So all of these types of things, I just think it's a lot of moving parts constantly, and you want to feel like you're touching everything, but you can't lean in and execute on everything. So I think that's the biggest challenge.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. Beth, this next one is for you. So talk to us a little bit about how you go about sourcing and attracting top talent for your portfolio companies.
Sure. So because I focus on really early stage companies, seed and sometimes A, the founders are actually in charge of recruiting. The founders actually own sales too, but recruiting is something I will sit down and say, look, let's say there's co-founders. I'll say you each have to spend 40% of your time recruiting if you really want to have a great people team by the time you raise a Series A. Again, I'm there to hold their hand. I'm not doing it for them. And they'll always look at each other and say, okay, I do 20%, you do. And I'm like, no, you each have to do 40%. And that's a lot of time because they're building a company too. So what founders tend to do is leverage their internal network as a first step, which is great. They probably went to computer science, they were computer science majors because most of our founders are technical. So they're going to leverage the university, whether that's a master's program, PhD, undergrad. After they've exhausted their internal network, they turn to their investor network. Did someone have a question?
I think someone's just.
Oh, I just heard some background noise. Sorry.
Yeah.
So when they leverage their investor network, we'll get like a newsletter saying, hey, we're looking for this, this, and this. So founders don't have a lot of free time and they need to build pipeline. So what I actually recommend, because we know when you're trying to hire technical people, reaching out to them on LinkedIn is not going to be helpful at all. So sourcing platforms are a really great tool that I recommend to founders. What this really does is help build the pipeline. So an example of a sourcing platform, and most of these platforms use AI or machine learning, and they're basically going into places and finding candidates that a human couldn't find. So for example, Fetcher is one that I recommend. You can check out Fetcher.ai. Another one, Rollbot. There's a bunch of them. And I have a bunch of content on the Homebrew site. If you just click on resources on our website, you can find a whole document on sourcing where I'm going to list out like 10 of the best sourcing platforms. So what a sourcing platform does is takes the burden off the founder for having to go source candidates. It builds the pipeline and can even do a drip campaign where they're sending out emails and helping set up the interviews. So that's what I recommend. Now, if you talk to somebody at, a larger fund where the talent team is 20 people, they may be a dedicated sourcer and all they're doing is sourcing all day and they're going to use different tools. But I can only speak to an early stage company. And again, the recruiter has to own or the founder has to own recruiting up until they hire somebody internally who's going to run talent or HR.
Okay, perfect. And we're getting a lot of really great questions in the chat, so I'm taking note of those. Thank you, everyone. And Cecilia, this next question is for you. Can you share a success story or one of your biggest wins in your role?
Yeah, so this is actually what Beth shared is very much complementary to and success by not necessarily my success, but I think a huge success within one of our portfolio companies. As Lauren also mentioned, AI is just such a big part of our portfolio, the general kind of tech ecosystem, and hiring ML AI engineers are incredibly difficult right now. And a lot of what Beth shared was what this company and how we worked on building their pipeline. We ended up using someone that is providing sourcing as a service, so it isn't tech driven. It is a human doing the sourcing, but he's incredibly good at being able to surface folks that maybe most people would not be able to just on LinkedIn be able to find, because he's going into places like GitHub and looking at meetups and Discord. So a lot of different channels to leverage, but what it anchors on is what the founder's willing to put in, right? Because when you're so early stage, they were in stealth for most of this when we were working together. It really is up to the founders to paint the narrative of why you should be joining them and why at this stage and what is compelling about the team, about the product. And that's exactly what they did. They put in the time. They had a great team, so the response rate was incredible, close to 11% positive response rates. which is probably pretty rare as well. So a lot of things kind of came together, but I think the things that you can control is the calls that you're willing to make, continuing to iterate, like how you talk about your company, why, what your employment brand is, and then really learn to start closing your candidates very early on. So their offer acceptance rate was also incredibly high. And so I think all of it comes together. You do need to put together a strategy. You do need to think about, what is the right target level and what are the skill sets you actually need. But from there, a lot of it is actually doing the actual work. And they ended up hiring, 2 animation engineers and an ML and AI engineer. And so within all of this, within under 5 months. So this was incredible success, on their part, and something that I feel like if I could help replicate for all of our portfolio companies, it would be amazing.
Awesome. Thank you. That's awesome. Okay, Beth, this one was something I had a lot of curiosity about when I was interviewing, and was hearing some very unique compensation styles. It was unique to me because I knew nothing about the VC world. But so can you talk to us a little bit about what someone could expect on compensation in the role of the VC talent partner, maybe like compensation structure and or total comp potential, et cetera?
Sure. So the first thing you have to understand is, where does the money come from? You work for a VC fund, but VCs sometimes don't generate money from exits for 10 years. So if you've been there 10 years, well, how do you get paid? So salaries come from something called management fees. So if you work for a billion-dollar fund, management fees can be anywhere from 1 to 2.5%. So let's say it's 2%. Then you're going to have 20 million in management fees. That's a lot to pay salaries. If you are a $100 million fund with a 2% management fee, you're going to have 2 million, which is less. So your salary at a VC firm is made up usually of 2 things. One, base salary, that's pretty consistent, and carried interest in the fund, meaning when a company exits and there's a return, you get some of that. And most talent partners will get carried interest in each fund. You hope you do. So 2 things are going to drive comp, and this is where it gets a little bit confusing. One is fund size. We just talked about that. The bigger the fund, the bigger the management fees, the more money they have for salaries. But then the other thing is level of experience. So you can have 30 years of experience, but if you work for a $100 million fund, you actually may make less than somebody that has 8 years of experience that works for a $5 billion fund. And I actually have examples of this. I see it. We all talk about this amongst talent partners. We're pretty transparent, but there are some funds that have more junior people that are making insane amounts of money based on the fund size. Now, True Search, you guys may know them. They're a great search firm. They do a comp survey every single year for talent partners. And it's very thorough. It's not that hard to get a copy of the study. And they basically do surveying of funds, under 500 million, the billion-dollar funds. And if you kind of look at overall, again, you have to understand there's 2 factors, but if you're an associate, the median is going to be about 130K, director 300, VP head of 400. This is just base. We're not even talking about carried interest. And then at the partner level, 600. But again, there's 2 things driving this. So you really have to understand, if you are in a position where you're negotiating salary, what that fund size is and your level of experience. And if anybody is talking to a VC firm about a role, I would say get a copy of that True survey so you can go in there with data. But unless you know those 2 things, it's hard to negotiate.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I was able to get a copy of that survey and kind of at the tail end of me interviewing. And I ended up sending it to one of the VCs that I got an offer with. And just to kind of give her perspective, I'm like, hey, you might want to negotiate your own salary a little bit. It was nice to have that because it felt very thorough. And I think really gave me an idea of what I was looking at, and just, being apples to apples when I was coming out of a completely different side of the business.
Right. And if I'm ever like, I get calls, sometimes people are talking to funds and they want help on salary negotiation. When I hear that they're only being offered a salary and a bonus and not carried interest, the first thing I'll say is, well, how are they truly invested in you?
Yeah.
You need skin in the game. If they're not offering you interest in the fund, to me, that's a huge red flag. They don't really see talent as an integral part of the organization. So
Yes.
you should always be negotiating carried interest. I mean, that's how you make your real money. It's not
Yes.
from your base salary.
Right. Yep. Thank you. That's incredibly helpful. Thank you, Beth. This next question is for Lauren, although we've gotten kind of layers of this already in the chat, so would love for any of you to also chime in. But this one is about, any advice for job seekers looking to break into the VC talent partner role. As I was scrolling through people's introductions, it looks like a lot of the people here on this call are really interested in the role. So kind of on the theme of, advice for job seekers looking to break in. How do you hear about VC open roles, VC talent partner roles? Maybe we can start there, Lauren, and then I'll kind of include a few other questions after that.
I would also be curious to hear Beth and Cecilia's perspective on this too, for what it's worth. But what I would say is, I think the most important thing is creating your own personal brand and ingraining yourself into VC talent. And I think what that looks like is like showing up at events, doing things like this, raising your hand and saying that it's something that down the road you'd be interested in. There's firms, of course, like True that, or Diversa Partners is who placed me in my role. A couple others, but I think take the calls, take the inbound, and continue to just express that this is something that you'd be interested in doing. And if there's events where you can get out in front of a lot of different VC talent partners, show up to those and ask how they got their foot in the door. These types of opportunities I've found, once you're in it, become far more fruitful, and you start to hear a lot more about it. I now have visibility, I think, into a lot of other roles that are open in the VC talent community simply because now I'm in it. We also have a community where we express, this is an open role. This is something that, is anyone interested in this, or do you know people that are? And so it really is kind of a little bit word of mouth, but as opposed to people posting on LinkedIn that there's an open talent partner role for a firm. That is very rare. So yeah, that's been my experience, is just really trying to get more exposure, raise my hand and talk to other people at other firms, talk to folks on the venture side, and just say that it's something that I have a level of interest in. But curious, Beth and Cecilia, if you feel that there's other productive ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on everything, Lauren. I would say we are usually the first to know, meaning the talent partner community. So if you're, really interested in a talent partner role, really try to get to know people in the community. It's a highly sought after job. I feel incredibly lucky that I have this job. And it sort of came to me. I wasn't out there looking. I was always sort of curious. But once you were part of this community, you hear about things much faster. So I think Lauren was spot on. But there's no magic answer. It's just it's networking. And finding new funds. I think that's actually, I would like to add.
I would echo that.
If you are staying on top of, just sort of venture news and of a new fund, doesn't mean they're going to hire a talent person right away, but trust me, they've become sort of the shiny new objects, especially at early stage funds. So if you hear about a new VC fund, reach out to the partner or the founder and say, hey, I've been following you. You've got a great list of portfolio companies. I'm interested, in this type of a role when you guys are ready. And if they say, oh, we don't really know what the role does, we don't need somebody, that's absolutely your green light to go in and explain what that person does. Because a lot of times they won't even have a job description. And they're like, we need a talent person.
That's great. A couple more like layers to this, and actually something I was talking to a Talent Collective member about yesterday was like maybe when you were first interviewing for your first VC talent partner role, what's something that you wish you had asked? Like maybe something that, you didn't really know that the role was a part of the role that was gonna, take fruition, and, you wish you had known about going into the role. Is there anything that's coming up for you ladies there?
Well, I didn't know I was going to have to make capital calls. I don't know if you guys know what those are, but when we raise a new fund, it's sort of like if you've ever worked at a law firm, you buy into the partnership. So every time we raise a new fund, I get called on to put money in. So that's something you should know as you're negotiating your salary. If you are going to be making capital calls, approximately what those are, so you can negotiate more money. I'm sure it said it in my contract or my offer letter, but I missed that somehow. And I was like, whoa, I have to pay all this money. Yeah.
I think for me, I wish that I mean, across the board, I think just asking like the level of investment in the talent team and like how talent is thought of within an organization. Because I will say, I think this role can be difficult to feel impactful in if you're not in the right environment. And so I want to make that part clear. It sounds very glamorous, and it can be. And I am also incredibly grateful that I'm in this role. But I think there's definitely been moments in my career to date where I've questioned whether the work that I'm doing is really moving the needle, because it wasn't being seen as the great work that it is. And that comes, I think, from maybe the level that you're at in your career, combined with whether or not you're in the partner conversations, and also combined with how familiar your investment partners are with talent and that dynamic. And so, yes, this role has become a lot more prominent and people are looking for it. But a lot of times people don't know what they want. Sometimes people want folks that come from a much deeper HR and people background. Sometimes people are more focused on bringing in someone that came from the agency side of things, or they just have no idea. And so getting them really calibrated, showing them where you're going to add value, and then also asking the questions as to how do you plan to work with talent, and how do you think about this type of dynamic? I think you can get a lot from that. And carried interest is definitely a component, because you can see in a quantitative way whether or not they're thinking of talent in a way that is very real. So I think those are the things.
That's great. Cecilia, and I think, Lauren, you just answered one of the questions that was in the chat. The last layer of this one, and maybe Cecilia, you could take a stab at it. Like, what would a typical interview process look like for this role?
Yeah, that's a great question. And maybe like I'll tie in some context from kind of Beth talking about when a fund is looking for a talent partner for the very first time. I was very lucky to have had really early conversations with Grayson, who's our chief portfolio officer here. And he did a lot of homework in terms of reaching out to people to try and understand like how is each firm kind of thinking about this role. And so by the time that I actually started interviewing, we had already had multiple conversations of what I think the role should be like and how I think this role would make impact, so on and so forth. Our firm is still pretty small. I met with every one of the partners. And so I do think it was great for me to know who they were and what they were working on, and for each one of them to meet me and ask specific questions that they thought were important. So I don't know if that should be a standard process, because if you're obviously a larger firm, that's not going to be possible. But I think it is important that every one of the investment partners understands like this, why we're bringing this person on, and like what value are they going to bring to the fund, and how does it tie into the overall investment like thesis and strategy, because otherwise it's going to be incredibly difficult for you to make the impact, and for them to understand that this is the type of impact you should be making, and this is valuable to the portfolio and to the founders and companies.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you. We have so many more questions. Probably not going to get through them all, but we're going to take them one by one here. So as I ask these, feel free, one or two of you, to answer. So when speaking to founders, do you recommend for early hires to be on site if they do have an office?
I think it can be a combination. We have companies where they're like, we value the in-person, so we want everyone to be here once a quarter for 1 to 2 weeks, paid for by the company. That way, they're still getting the in-person, but they're able to hire their talent anywhere so that they can get the best of the best. But there are also companies that are like, we're really small right now. We would love everyone to be here and be able to work together. And I think it can work in a lot of ways. I have candidates tell me some prefer fully remote, some prefer to be in person, and they feel like it's a startup. They want to be there and be a part of everything. So I don't know if there's like one right answer for everyone. And I think having some level of flexibility, intentional about it, and being able to articulate why, because sometimes and maybe I see this more with other venture firms where they're saying, oh, you have to be here 4 or 5 times a week, but it's hard to articulate that value proposition, especially when there may be people that are distributed that may not be adhering to that exact model if they live a little bit further away from the office. When that happens, when there's kind of disparity between, how 2 employees are operating versus this one employee, and there's no real reason behind it. I think that's when it can become, that can fall apart pretty quickly. And in terms of, why, when we think about in person, it's really for that collaboration. But if that's not even happening, why are you asking people to commit to a commute to do so?
Yeah, great. Thank you. This next question is for maybe anyone who's like a fractional recruiter, maybe doing consulting or even has an agency. How do those people go about establishing relationships with VC talent partners so that they can be kept up top of mind for any of their portfolio companies?
I think on this one, this is definitely something I've seen a massive uptick in over the course of the past like 8 months. A lot of people, I think, are a little apprehensive in this market to jump into something full time, and people are far more inclined to want to have a little bit of a portfolio of work, whether it be on the talent side, whether it be on the HR side, whether it be on the finance side. I've seen it across the board. I think the best thing that you can do is continue to you can very well just reach out to talent partners and say, hey, I'd love to make the introduction. This is where I'm spending my time. These are the types of companies that I've worked with, what have you. If you are working with companies that are in certain portfolios, I think a better way to go about it is to have those companies or those founders then go to the talent partner and say, hey, I've had a really positive experience with blank in your portfolio, and I think you should talk to them about, potentially utilizing them across the broader portfolio. I just think that goes a much further. I mean, that for me feels more meaningful than cold outreach, because it's really tough for me to just know the quality of the work. Yep. So if I'm hearing from a portfolio company or a founder that I trust and respect, that they've had a positive interaction with someone that's helping in a fractional capacity, I'm way more inclined to then refer them to the rest of the portfolio. So I think that would be my one piece of advice.
Love that. Any other comments on that one? Pretty good. Okay. So next question, how do you manage the right candidate for one stage in the investing company growth that is not the right candidate for the next stage? I found the cheese is always moving depending on the stage.
To clarify, is this once a candidate is already, like, let's say that there's someone already in a full-time capacity at a company, or how are we thinking about the need here? I'm just trying to understand.
Correct. So, hi, I'm Diane.
Hi.
I work for a holding company, so similar, but it's a private family that doesn't have investors, and I manage a great portfolio of companies. And the cheese is moving where we potentially put somebody in a role that's good for one area, and then it changes to a different stage. And we have a great person in the role. And we have conversations around that. But I just wanted to hear your thoughts because it is something that always comes up. We try to be as transparent as possible, but yeah, I just wanted your thoughts on that.
It's a tricky one. I think something that I've found is, yeah, I mean, transparency from the get-go is always important, right? I've learned the hard way that it's not the best thing to just blindly promise that, someone's going to be in the top job the whole time. These are things we don't know, and companies change. And if you get to a certain place from a revenue standpoint, you need to bring in your second phase of growth team. They should be prepared for that. So I think just being candid that like, hey, this is the need right now. This is how we're thinking about the role evolving. There could be an opportunity for you to have a shot at that top role if we hit a second level of growth that we hope we do. But there also is a chance that, maybe they decide that there's someone else that's better suited. Just being super candid about it. And sometimes it's not what people want to hear, but I think it's better to be thoughtful about that, so that you can try and retain them in a different capacity. There's, a lot of incredible talent that sticks through a company's trajectory. And maybe they were once leading sales and revenue, and then they move into more of a strategy or sales ops type capacity. And that could be interesting and also help them broaden their scope. So they are the right person for that next company. So that's my 2 cents on it, but curious if you guys have any other perspectives.
I would, 100% agree with that, Lauren. And on the flip side, right, there are folks that love the early stage. They love to build from 0 to 1. The company will also get to a stage that maybe they're no longer super excited because their swim lanes have become more narrow. So at the end of the day, I think there will be a time and a place for everyone, but setting those expectations really early and so no one's going to be blindsided on either side, I think is going to be important and will maintain, team morale and all of that good stuff.
Great. All right. Let's see. So trust is so important in recruiting and working with stakeholders. Have you ever found it difficult to build trust with one of your founders quickly? What did you do and how did you work through it in that scenario?
I definitely encountered that when I first started. I think because I was coming from a big company, Salesforce, and I was doing executive search, and they didn't think I was very high touch or scrappy. And that was actually one of the reasons I was hired, is because my partners really thought I can be really scrappy, but I can also be strategic. They wanted someone with breadth. So I actually just really got in the weeds with some founders who I think were somewhat mistrusting, and I did sourcing for them. I can't do that for every company. And what I said to them was, look, I'm going to do this for you for this search, but I can't continue to do this. I'll show you how to do it. But I really did get in there and do sourcing, and that helped build trust.
Yeah, I think doing the work as opposed to just saying you're going to do it is everything. So, you can always sense when people, I think part of what makes us all great at our job is you have a sixth sense, right? You can kind of pick up on things that people aren't saying. And so you can feel when someone's really leaning in and taking your advice and wanting to work with you. And you can feel when maybe they're not buying it. And so when that's the case, I just double down and say that, I just follow up a little bit more proactively. I continue to send things that I think they should be in the know on, and continue to just offer great work until they budge and love me.
Have a low ego in this job. If you have an ego, talent partner role is probably not for you, because you're never going to be the smartest person in the room. You're surrounded by people who've done incredible things, and there is a lot of ego. Some more at some firms than others, but I think you have to take your ego out of it in order to be really successful.
Great. Couple last questions here. I think we might be able to get to them all. So on the note of, again, breaking into the VC talent partner role, is technical recruiting, so like engineering experience, critical to that role? Or are some VCs open to business recruiting, talent management, talent density experience?
I think it depends on the firm and where their investment strategy and thesis is. I would say earlier stage, for example, in my role, engineering is incredibly important. A lot of the searches that I do help support and the founders are actually leaning in are for founding engineers and like founding product designers. But I'm also a huge believer that you can transition. You can transfer the skills that you have as a great recruiter. But if it is something that you're excited about, do your due diligence, even if it means, doing things for free, but it will allow you to have exposure to more of the landscape that you think would be ultimately what you would be working with so that you have that knowledge. It will definitely be super helpful. And I think definitely in this current market, right, folks will be like, I want everyone to check off like every single box. So the more you're able to kind of just broaden your own knowledge and visibility into like the different parts of a business as they continue to grow is always going to be very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Great. Last question on breaking into the industry. Are there any specific events that you find are most valuable for networking within the VC talent partner community?
I mean, most of the events that we go to, you have to be a talent partner. So I don't have a good answer.
Either. This is probably one of the, great ways so that you do have exposure to folks that are already operating in the space.
Yeah, I think that's all fair. I think, I would say there's no specific events that come to mind. I think it's seeing who's attending different events and just trying to get in front of people. And I know that that's not a perfect answer, but I honestly think that's the best way to go about it. Keeping a pulse on who's going to be in town, who you want to get in front of, and going and showing up to the things that you are allowed to. Mm-hmm. Don't crash the VC talent partner.
Yeah. We'll know. We'll know who you are. Okay. And then last question is on actually DEI. So how do you coach founders on DEI at the early stages of their companies? Is that even a focus at this stage for them?
If you don't start early, you're going to have a problem. So when I talked about sourcing, the number one thing I say to founders is like, hey, if you don't start early, you're going to have a problem. So after you exhaust your grad school network and your investor network, if you look around and there's, 8 males and 2 females, it's already too late. So what I do is really start early with them and try to build an inclusive team. And that's really just through, the best sourcing tools, making sure that if you do bring on, let's say, a female head of engineering, you also don't make them responsible for, doing every single interview to try to bring on more females. Like they're there to do a job. So you really have to make sure that those first hires are going to be set up for success and have resources, which is easier said than done, but it's never too early.
Great.
Well, this was such a great panel, ladies. I mean, I could tell just from the flood of questions coming in the chat, so much interest in this topic. Could not thank you more for coming here and being here with us today. So thank you for your time. Just a quick heads up for everybody who's on the call. We do have a public virtual event next week. I think it's on Thursday, May 23rd on women's pay equity. So would love to have everybody join us for that one. Just look at Talent Collective's LinkedIn page. I'm sure you can find it there. And then if you are a woman in TA and are interested in joining a community for women in TA, please reach out to me. I'd love to chat with you. Again, thank you all for being here, and I hope everyone has a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Krista.
Thank you all.